say you never really know someone until money is involved. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible when I discovered that the man I planned to marry was systematically destroying everything I had built. And he was doing it with a smile on his face, and my own business partner's help. My name is Cameron Cross, and at 28 years old, I was the youngest Omega to ever build a tech company worth $500 million. Everyone said I was lucky, blessed, a prodigy. What they didn't know was that I had clawed my way up from nothing, surviving an abusive family who threw me out at 16 for being an Omega, living in shelters, working 3 jobs, while putting myself through college. When I finally launched my software company, Nexus Solutions, 5 years ago, I promised myself I would never be vulnerable again, never depend on anyone, never let my guard down. Then I met Derek Chen. He was everything I thought I wanted in an alpha: successful, charming, educated, and seemingly supportive of my career. We met at a tech conference 3 years ago, and he pursued me relentlessly with flowers, handwritten notes, and genuine interest in my work. 6 months ago, he proposed on a yacht under the stars, and I said yes without hesitation. My business partner, Troy Mason, had been my friend since college. We built Nexus Solutions together from my dorm room. I handled the creative vision and product development, while Troy managed operations and finances. I trusted him completely, which was my first mistake. 2 months before my wedding, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. Derek began asking detailed questions about company finances, investor contracts, and proprietary technology. When I asked why he was so curious, he laughed it off, saying he just wanted to understand my world better. Then, there were the private meetings between Derek and Troy that would suddenly end whenever I walked into a room. The shared glances, the way Troy started pushing me to sign updated partnership agreements that our lawyer said were unnecessary, but I ignored the warning signs because I was in love. Because I wanted to believe that finally, after years of fighting alone, I had people I could trust. Everything shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I had left the office early because of a migraine, something that had been happening frequently due to wedding stress. When I returned an hour later to grab my medication from my desk, I heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly open. I should have announced myself, but something in Troy's tone made me stop. "The documents are ready," Troy was saying. "The moment Cameron signs the merger papers at the wedding reception, the company transfer activates. He'll be signing away 60% ownership without even realizing it." Derek's laugh made my blood run cold. "And he trusts you enough not to read the fine print." "Perfect. Once we have controlling interest, we'll push him out, rebrand, and sell to Marcus Tech. They've already offered $700 million. We split it 50-50. "What about Cameron?" Troy asked. "Won't he fight back?" Derek's response destroyed me. "Cameron is an Omega. Once we're married, I'll have legal rights to contest any claims he makes. We'll tie him up in court for years. By the time anything gets resolved, we'll have the money offshore and he'll have nothing. Besides, who's going to believe an emotional Omega over 2 successful alphas with documentation? He's been so stressed lately, we can easily paint him as unstable, unfit to run a company." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep listening. Troy spoke again, and this time there was hesitation in his voice. "I almost feel bad. We've been friends since college. Get over it," Derek snapped. "This is business. Cameron is a means to an end. You wanted out of his shadow, didn't you? Tired of being the partner nobody notices while he gets all the credit. This is your chance to finally be the one in control." "You're right," Troy replied, and I heard the resolve in his voice. "I'm tired of watching him get everything, while I do the actual work of keeping the company running. It's time he learned he's not as untouchable as he thinks. They discussed more details, but I stopped processing the words. I quietly backed away from the conference room, grabbed my things, and walked out of the building in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking garage for over an hour, shaking, crying, feeling like the world had tilted off its axis. Everything I had built, everything I had worked for was about to be stolen by the two people I trusted most. That night, Derek came home to our shared penthouse with takeout and wine, kissing me hello like nothing was wrong. I smiled and pretended everything was fine, even though every cell in my body screamed to confront him. But I didn't, because somewhere between the parking garage and our front door, something inside me had changed. The heartbreak crystallized into something harder, sharper. If Derek and Troy thought I was just another naive omega they could manipulate and discard, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I had survived being disowned, homeless, and discriminated against. I had built an empire from nothing, and now I was going to show them that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has absolutely nothing left to lose. Over the next week, I played the role of blissful fiancé perfectly. I discussed wedding flowers with Derek, laughed at his jokes, and acted excited about our future together. Meanwhile, I was carefully planning my counterattack. First, I called my personal lawyer, Elizabeth Santos, someone I had hired years ago, who had no connection to the company. I met her at a private office across town and told her everything. She listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. This is fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy, Elizabeth said when I finished. We can have them arrested. Not yet, I replied. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. I want them destroyed completely, legally and publicly. Elizabeth studied me for a moment, then nodded. Tell me what you need. I need you to secretly audit every company transaction for the past 3 years. I want to know exactly what Troy has been doing with our finances. I also need these merger documents analyzed, I said, sliding the papers across her desk. I had taken photos of the contracts in Troy's office. These are designed to trigger automatic ownership transfer upon your marriage, Elizabeth confirmed after reviewing them. The language is deliberately complex and buried in subsections. Most people wouldn't catch it. Can you create counter documents? Something that looks identical but actually protects my ownership. She smiled. I can do better than that. I can create documents that would transfer their shares to you if they attempt any fraudulent activity. It's a legal trap. If they try to spring theirs, they'll trigger their own downfall. Perfect, I said. Over the next 2 weeks, Elizabeth worked quietly while I continued my performance. At home in the office, I started secretly recording conversations, documenting every suspicious meeting, and copying files from Troy's computer when he wasn't looking. I discovered that he had been embezzling small amounts for over a year, hiding the transactions in fake vendor accounts. It wasn't enough to bankrupt the company, but it was enough to send him to prison. I also hired a private investigator who uncovered something that made my stomach turn. Derek was already married. He had a husband in another state, an omega he had married 5 years ago and never divorced. Our entire relationship was bigamy. He wasn't just stealing my company. He was committing fraud on every possible level. When I showed Elizabeth the marriage certificate, she actually laughed. Cameron, with this we don't just have a case. We have a nuclear bomb. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday. It was Tuesday when I finalized my plan. That evening, Derek suggested we sign some prenuptial paperwork his lawyer had prepared. I pretended to review it, then signed with a smile, knowing that Elizabeth had already filed legal injunctions that would freeze any transfer of assets the moment Derek attempted to activate any fraudulent contracts. On Thursday, I called a special board meeting for Friday afternoon, citing important pre-wedding company announcements. Troy looked nervous, but didn't suspect anything. Derek wasn't invited since he wasn't part of the company, but I knew Troy would tell him everything anyway. Friday arrived. I wore my best suit, styled my hair perfectly, walked into that boardroom with my head high. The board members, 5 investors who had backed me from the beginning, sat around the table. Troy sat at his usual spot, looking confident. I stood at the head of the table and smiled. Thank you all for coming. I have some important information to share before my wedding tomorrow. The boardroom fell silent as I connected my laptop to the projector. Troy shifted in his seat, probably expects some sentimental speech about gratitude and partnership. Instead, the screen filled with a spreadsheet showing 3 years of embezzled funds, all traced back to accounts Troy controlled. What is this? One of the board members asked. This, I said calmly, is evidence that our chief operating officer has been systematically stealing from this company for over a year. Troy shot to his feet, his face flushing red. That's insane. Cameron, what are you doing? I clicked to the next slide, which showed bank statements, fake vendor invoices, and email exchanges between Troy and the phantom companies he had created. I'm exposing the truth, I replied. You've stolen nearly $2 million, Troy. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? You can't prove any of this? Troy blustered, but his voice shook. The investigators I hired can, and they already have. I've turned over all evidence to the authorities. But that's not even the worst part. I advanced to the next slide, and the room filled with audio. It was the recording from the conference room, Troy and Derek discussing their plan to steal my company. Their voices were crystal clear as they detailed every step of their scheme. As the recording played, I watched Troy's face drain of all color. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to shock to absolute fury. These are doctored. Troy tried, desperately. He's setting me up because I told him I was concerned about his omega emotions affecting his business decisions. The lies were pathetic, and everyone in the room knew it. I played 3 more recordings, each one more damning than the last. Then, I displayed the fraudulent merger documents Troy had prepared, with Elizabeth's legal analysis, highlighting exactly how they were designed to steal my ownership. Mr. Mason, one of the board members said coldly, do you have anything truthful to say? Troy looked around the room, realizing he had no escape. Then his expression twisted into something ugly. You know what? Fine. Yes, I did it. I'm tired of being in Cameron's shadow, tired of watching an Omega get credit for work I contributed to. Derek was right. Omegas are too emotional and weak to run companies like this. You all know it's true, even if you're too politically correct to say it. The room erupted. Board members shouted over each other, calling for Troy's immediate termination and legal prosecution. I remained calm, waiting for the chaos to settle. When it finally did, I spoke quietly. Troy, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and you're banned from company property. Legal action will follow. You can't do this, Troy said desperately. I own 30% of this company. Actually, I replied, pulling out another document. You don't. Per our original partnership agreement, which you clearly never read carefully, any partner engaged in fraud, embezzlement, or actions detrimental to the company automatically forfeits their shares. Elizabeth has already filed the paperwork. Your ownership reverted to me the moment you committed your first theft. Troy stared at me in disbelief. But Derek said, Derek lied to you. I interrupted. About everything. Security entered the boardroom at that moment. Troy was escorted out while screaming threats and insults. I didn't react. I had expected this. After Troy was removed, I addressed the board. I apologize for bringing this to you so close to my wedding. Unfortunately, there's more you need to know. Derek Chen, my fiancé, orchestrated this entire scheme. I displayed the evidence of Derek's existing marriage, his history of financial fraud in previous relationships, communications between him and Troy planning to sell Nexus Solutions the moment they gained control. He targeted me specifically because of my company's value, I explained. This was never about love. It was a long-term con. One of the board members, Margaret, who had been my first investor, spoke up. Cameron, what do you need from us? Your support when this goes public tomorrow, I said, because it will be very public. The wedding is tomorrow, another board member said. You're still going through with it? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Oh yes, I've spent too much money on that venue to waste it. The next morning, I woke up alone in a hotel suite. I had told Derek I was staying with friends for a traditional night apart before the wedding. In reality, I needed space to prepare for what was coming. My phone buzzed with texts from Derek. Can't wait to marry you today. I love you so much. Our future starts tonight. Each message made my stomach turn, but I responded with equally sweet lies. By noon, I was dressed in my custom white suit, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I looked good, confident, powerful. This wasn't the outfit of someone about to be victimized. This was armor. Elizabeth arrived with final documents. Everything is ready, she confirmed. The moment he attempts to sign the marriage certificate, the fraud alerts will trigger. Law enforcement is already standing by. I also contacted Marcus Tech. When I told them about Derek and Troy's plan to sell them a stolen company, they were very interested in providing testimony. They're the ones who initially approached Troy and Derek, offering to buy Nexus if they could get control. They've agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity. Perfect, I said. The wedding venue was spectacular, exactly as I had planned months ago when I still believed in fairy tales. 300 guests filled the garden space, including business partners, investors, clients, and yes, several journalists I had personally invited that morning, with promises of a major announcement. Derek stood at the altar looking handsome and excited. When he saw me begin walking down the aisle, his face lit up with what looked like genuine love. It was a masterful performance. I reached the altar, and the officiant began the ceremony. We progressed through the traditional vows. Derek spoke beautifully about partnership, trust, and building a future together. Every word was poison wrapped in silk. Then it was my turn. Derek, I began, looking directly into his eyes. 3 years ago, you walked into my life and made me believe in love. You made me feel safe, supported, cherished. I paused, watching his confident smile. That's why it hurt so much when I discovered that everything about you is a lie. His smile faltered. What? I turned to address the confused guests. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my fiancé and my business partner have been planning to steal my company. They intended to use our marriage as a legal vehicle to transfer ownership, then sell Nexus Solutions and disappear with the money. The venue erupted in gasps and whispers. Derek's face went pale. Cameron, what are you talking about? This is insane. Is it? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the venue's sound system. Let's ask Troy. I played the conference room recording, the one where Derek and Troy discussed their entire plan in detail. Their voices filled the garden, clear and damning. As the recording played, I watched Derek's expression transform, from shock to panic to rage. When it ended, the silence was deafening. This is taken out of context, Derek tried desperately. Cameron has been under tremendous stress and I think he's having some kind of breakdown. Really? I replied. Then I displayed the next piece of evidence on the large screens we had set up for the ceremony. Screens that were supposed to show our engagement photos. Instead, they showed Derek's existing marriage certificate. "You're already married," I announced. "You have been for 5 years. Our entire relationship is fraud. In fact, your husband is here today." I invited him. A man stood up from the back row, looking devastated. Derek had told him he was on a business trip. The two Omegas Derek had victimized made eye contact, and I saw recognition and shared pain pass between us. Derek tried to run, but security guards I had hired blocked the exits. At that moment, 2 police officers walked down the aisle. "Derek Chen," one of them said, "you're under arrest for fraud, bigamy, conspiracy to commit theft, and identity theft." As they handcuffed him, Derek looked at me with pure hatred. "You'll regret this. Everyone will see you as a vindictive Omega who couldn't handle being left." "No," I said calmly. "They'll see me as someone who refused to be a victim." The officers led Derek away while guests watched in stunned silence. Then I turned to address everyone. "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but I wanted witnesses to the truth. Nexus Solutions is not for sale, will never be controlled by fraudsters, and will continue to operate with integrity. To those who supported me, thank you. To those who doubted an Omega could run a successful company, I hope this demonstrates that we're stronger than you think." I walked back down the aisle alone, head high, while the venue erupted in conversation behind me, and the fallout from the failed wedding was immediate and spectacular. By that evening, the story had gone viral. Omega CEO exposes fiancé's fraud scheme at wedding altar became international news. My phone exploded with interview requests, support messages, and surprisingly, stories from other Omegas who had experienced similar betrayals. Derek and Troy were both arrested. The evidence Elizabeth and I had compiled was overwhelming. Derek faced charges of fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy. Troy was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Derek's other husband filed for divorce and joined my lawsuit as a co-plaintiff. The legal proceedings moved quickly, with Marcus Tech's testimony confirming that Troy and Derek had approached them about selling a stolen company. Prosecutors had everything they needed. 3 months later, both men accepted plea deals to avoid trial. Derek received 7 years in federal prison. Troy got 5 years plus orders to repay everything he had stolen with interest. Nexus Solutions not only survived the scandal but thrived. The publicity, ironically, brought us more business. Companies wanted to work with the Omega, who had outsmarted sophisticated fraudsters. Our valuation increased to over $800 million within 6 months. But success felt hollow. Yes, I had won. Yes, I had protected my company and exposed the men who tried to destroy me. But I was also alone, more guarded than ever, convinced that trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. That's when I met Dr. Julian Reeves. He was an alpha psychiatrist who specialized in trauma recovery for fraud victims. My therapist recommended him after I started having panic attacks every time I had to review contracts or meet with potential business partners. Our first session was awkward. I sat in his office, arms crossed defensively, ready to recite the story I had told dozens of times to lawyers and journalists. But Julian didn't ask about the fraud. Instead, he asked, "How are you sleeping?" Question caught me off guard. Badly, I admitted. Nightmares. Constantly. I dreamed that I signed the merger papers, that I didn't discover the truth in time, that I lost everything. Julian nodded, taking notes. Your body is processing trauma. What happened to you wasn't just financial betrayal. Someone you loved weaponized that love against you. That's a profound violation. Over the following weeks, I met with Julian twice a week. Slowly, carefully, he helped me understand that what Derek and Troy had done wasn't a reflection of my worth or judgment. They were skilled manipulators who had targeted me deliberately. "You're not naive for trusting people you love," Julian said during one session. "You're human. The goal isn't to never trust again. It's to learn to trust wisely, to recognize red flags, and to know that even if you're betrayed again, you'll survive." I found myself looking forward to our sessions, not just for the therapy but for Julian himself. He was different from any alpha I had known. Gentle, but not condescending. Intelligent, but not arrogant. He treated me as an equal, never making my omega status relevant to our conversations. One day, about 4 months into therapy, I arrived early for my appointment and found Julian in the waiting room, hanging new artwork. It was a painting of a phoenix rising from ashes. "I like it," I said. He turned, smiling. "I thought it was appropriate for this practice. Everyone who comes here is rebuilding from something." "You chose well," I replied, then hesitated. "Julian, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why did you specialize in fraud victim recovery?" His expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable. "Because 6 years ago, my younger brother in Omega was targeted by someone similar to Derek. A long-term relationship built entirely to steal his inheritance. My brother didn't discover the truth until it was too late. He lost everything, and the shame and betrayal drove him to attempt suicide." Julian's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain beneath it. "He survived, but he's never fully recovered. I became a psychiatrist because I wanted to help people like him, people like you, understand that being victimized doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Thank you for sharing that." He met my eyes. "You remind me of him, actually. That same strength, that refusal to stay broken. It's remarkable." Something shifted between us in that moment, a connection that went beyond therapist and patient. The following week, I made a decision. At the end of our session, I said, "Julian, I need to terminate our therapeutic relationship." He looked concerned. "May I ask why? Have I done something?" "No," I said quickly. "You've helped me more than you know. But I can't continue therapy with you because I'm developing feelings that aren't appropriate for this setting." Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been considering referring you to a colleague for the same reason. This is completely unethical of me to admit, but I have feelings for you too, Cameron." My heart raced. "So what do we do?" He smiled. "You officially terminate therapy today. I refer you to an excellent colleague, Dr. Michelle Torres, and then, if you're comfortable, I'd like to take you to dinner next week. Not as your therapist, as someone who would really like to get to know you outside of this office." I agreed. Our first date was at a quiet restaurant. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed. Julian didn't try to fix me or save me. He just listened, laughed at my jokes, and shared his own stories. Over the following months, we built something I hadn't thought possible after Derek, a relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care. Julian never tried to control me or my business. He celebrated my successes and supported me through setbacks without making himself the center of my story. 1 year after the failed wedding, Julian and I were having breakfast in my penthouse when he said something that made me stop mid-bite. "I love you, Cameron, and I want you to know that I see you, not your company, not your omega status, not what you can give me, just you." I stared at him, emotions overwhelming me. For so long I had believed that my value to others was purely transactional, that people wanted access to my success, my money, my connections. The idea that someone could love me simply for existing felt impossible. "I love you too," I whispered, "but I'm terrified." "I know," Julian replied gently. "After what you've been through, that's completely reasonable. We'll go as slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere." 2 years after everything fell apart and rebuilt, I stood before a different altar. This time the wedding was small, just 20 close friends and family in a private garden. Julian stood across from me. No manipulation in his eyes, just love and commitment. As we exchanged vows I had written myself, I reflected on how much had changed. I had learned that betrayal doesn't define you. Survival, that trust, while risky, is also what makes life worth living. And that sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you clears the path for the best thing you never saw coming. When Julian and I kissed as married partners, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of genuine love and safety. After the ceremony, former board member Margaret approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Cameron, not just for surviving, but for letting yourself live again." "Thank you," I said, "for believing in me when others didn't." She smiled. "You made it easy." "You're remarkable." As Julian and I drove away from our wedding that evening, I looked at the man beside me and thought about all the people who had doubted that an Omega could be strong, successful, and whole without being controlled by an Alpha. I had proven them all wrong, not by becoming hard and closed off, but by surviving betrayal and choosing to trust again wisely. My story wasn't about revenge, though that had been satisfying. It was about reclaiming my narrative, protecting what I had built, and understanding that my worth was never dependent on someone else's validation. 5 years later, Nexus Solutions is worth over $1 billion. Julian and I have built a life filled with honesty and partnership, and I use my platform to help other Omegas recognize fraud, escape abusive situations, and build their own success. Derek was released from prison last year. He sent me a letter asking for forgiveness and a second chance. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I had moved so far beyond that chapter of my life that engaging with it felt pointless. Troy also reached out, claiming he had found rehabilitation and wanted to apologize. I sent a single reply: "I forgive you for my own peace, but you'll never be part of my life again. What you did taught me valuable lessons about trust and strength. I hope you've learned something too." Today, when I speak at conferences about business, technology, and Omega rights, people often ask if I regret how publicly I handled Derek and Troy's exposure. My answer is always the same: silence protects abusers. Truth protects future victims. I chose truth. My name is Cameron Cross. I'm an Omega, a CEO, a husband, and a survivor. And this is my story of how I learned that the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building a life so full of genuine love and success that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote in your journey to happiness. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, that betrayal doesn't define you, and that you are worthy of real love. Don't forget to hit the notification bell for more stories. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and remember, you are enough exactly as you are. Thank you, and stay blessed.